My name is Ramon Racelis, Jr., and I was born in Manila, Philippines on June 20th, 1937. The first thing I remember is that I was being sent to kindergarten. My father had a chauffeur, and my problem was when I got out of school, I didn't know if I was going home in a bus or a car. So I was always had this anxiety that I was going to be left because I didn't know which conveyance I was going to be coming home in. When the Japanese invaded the Philippines, there was a meeting held with all the students, and the principal said that there would not be school for a few months until the Americans came and defeated the Japanese, and then we would continue school in a few months. Unfortunately, that tended to be 3 to 3.5 years later. It was strange because I had just started, and to me, I was disconcerted because I wanted to go to school, and all of a sudden, after only a few months, I was out of school. I was being forced to move out of the house on Balete Drive by the Japanese, because the Japanese used the house as their regional headquarters. So we were just thrown out on the street. We had to find another place. This place, as I remember, was in a lowland. It would flood, and I can remember that the house actually had about 2 feet of water in it, and all the sleeping quarters, I believe, were upstairs. I used to swim around into the kitchen and then into the living room, and I thought that was a lot of fun. Your house was flooded. My father and my uncles, there were 2 uncles, they had a cache of weapons. They were guns, probably rifles, and it was forbidden by the Japanese to have arms. So they buried it. They put a lot of grease around it. They wrapped it up in some form of waterproof material and buried it. And they didn't want me to see it because they were afraid that if I was ever interrogated as a little kid, that I would say, yes, I saw them do it, So they tried to keep me from seeing where they were doing it, but I did know where it was, unfortunately. We moved out of that middle house into a house that was on 16 Tuberias Drive, and I remember that it had a nice yard all the way around. It was fenced in. There was a garage, and there was a driveway, concrete driveway, and I learned how to ride a bicycle at probably the age of 5. It took me a long time because of the war. The tires were flat, and you couldn't get it. You couldn't buy tires. You couldn't find bicycle tires, so I had to try to learn on a bike that with deflated tires, which is even harder. The house had cutouts on that frieze, and the symbols were the Nazi symbols. It was because the German charge d'affaires, who were allies of the Japanese, he lived there with his family before we had. We feel, I think my father always felt, that was a reason that the Japanese never came into our house, because they felt that this was a family that was allied with them, being German, which of course wasn't true, but thank goodness it might have helped us a great deal. In a case of war, to protect ourselves, the families got together. There were two other families in this house, which was small. There was a trap door, and that you could activate a rug to move across the trap door to hide it. That was under the large kitchen table that we had. So they constructed this trap door underneath, and we practiced when they gave us the signal to dive into the underneath the house, and we were to be quiet in case Japanese soldiers came in. We had air raids all the time. Americans were bombing. They were bombing military targets, but tried not to hit civilian targets. In fact, we found many pieces of shrapnel in the yard. In fact, it was kind of like a hunt that we would do after air raids. It became a norm for me because being at the age of 6, I felt this was normal. This was life. I didn't think there was anything bad or good. This is just the way life was, and that we'd probably be doing this for forever. My friends that I played with were basically outside our house. I would climb the fence and go into the next yard, and there were a lot of children. So I played with the many children, and they had different languages. My father told me that at the age of 7 that I could speak 5 dialects because there were children from all those different areas of the Philippines. I was the pet of the family because nothing could go wrong. So they would play tricks on me sometimes. And a good example is they formed a club, my sisters, called the Cuckoo Nut Club. In order to get initiated, they made up this initiation ritual that I was supposed to push a peanut with my nose around the house. Well, I was pretty upset. So I started crying, and my mother said, told them that they had to put me into the Cuckoo Nut Club. So I was able to use my parents against my sisters. Didn't do much at all with my sisters. I think they enjoyed their friendship together, and they went to a lot of things together. They both played piano, and I can remember we would have recitals where I would lay on the floor and just listen to my sister, my eldest sister, Elisa, playing on the piano along with Mary. I have to say, I never thought about having a brother. I don't think I ever had that wish. Oh, I'd say the other impact would be coming from the Philippines to the United States is a big, big jolt. I remember leaving and crying, and sad was that I was going to lose my best dog, Mooter. But there was this adventurous new world. We got on that ship called the Noordam. The sailors would always give us little presents, popcorn and candy, and I was really seasick. And it's something you can't get rid of. It's a horrible feeling. It took us a month. Our parents got us up. I think it was like 2 a.m. because we went under the Golden Gate Bridge. That had a real significance to us because it was like we're coming home to this whole new place. It was a completely new world. I had a Tagalog accent. It affected me for a while because when I met other kids, it was obvious that I was from another place. You know, I got teased. It drives you to speak English really well. My father stayed behind. He was asked by the president, Quezon, to stay and be on a committee of 3 people who were to determine where they would put the money that the United States was paying to the Philippines so that they could start to build up the Philippines again. So he came over a year after. And I remember when he came back, and he came to the apartment door, and I didn't know who he was. Yeah, and I was probably 7.5. Yes, my father had a very strong influence on me. I would say the biggest quality was very honest. Unfortunately, she was very biased and prejudiced against Jews. And my sisters, especially Mary, was always had problems between them because of that discrimination or that prejudice. It was something that bothered, I think, all of us, including I'm sure my father didn't like it either, but she held that conviction about that Jews weren't bad. But she was caring. She loved us. She gave us a good life. And she had the one flaw that I can remember. And unfortunately, I don't think she ever lost that. She did have a hatred for the Japanese because of what they did to the Philippines and basically ruined our early life because my father has been doing well as a manager of a bank when he came back from the U.S. and we had a pretty good life going. He belonged to the Whack Whack Country Club, and you know, we were in the elites at that time, and all of a sudden the world breaks in on us. And my sisters and I were very privileged to have been born into a family that were go-getters. My dad getting a scholarship and getting a master's degree, and our mother getting a master's degree. That's unheard of in those days. So we were very privileged, I have to say. Life was certainly easier for us than most, and we're very grateful for that. There was no school. I was tutored. I had a lady who came and gave me lessons. I was tutored so well that I actually skipped a grade. I went into the 3rd grade immediately. I always bragged to Joan. I graduated at 16. I went to Forest Hills High School in Forest Hills, Queens, New York City. I didn't join in any activities at all. I took a $15 a week job delivering groceries. They provided me with a bike with a big carrier in front, and I got a job with a delicatessen, a Jewish delicatessen. In the 4th year, my mother decided to. When I was about 16, we lived in Forest Hills in an apartment, and my sister, Mary, would have her friends from Hunter College, junior high school, over at the apartment. So I devised a scheme whereby I would take my magic tricks. I used to try and do magic, but I wasn't good at the hand type where you can produce cards and all those things with your hands. Those are real magicians. I bought tricks from a store, a magic trick store down in the center of Broadway, and they were very good. They would astound people. So they would ask me to do a magic show. So I would show them a trick, and of course they were astounded, and they would ask me, how did I do that? And I said, it cost you 10 cents.
A quarter.
A quarter? Quarter. Maybe my prices went up. 25 cents. And they would pay it. They would pay it. And then I'd show them another trick, and I cost them another quarter. That's how I made money. That we would move up to Williamson to be close to Bob Lockley and the two girls. The senior class had 45 students, and I came from Forest Hills, where there was a class of 900. So it was a big change for me, because I got involved in almost everything. And immediately all the sports coaches asked me to see if I could join some of the teams. I did not go out for the soccer team, which Williamson had in place of football, but it was basketball season, and I always played a lot of basketball in the schoolyard. So I was able to get on the first team as the guard, brought the ball down, and we had a record of about 6-6 when we ended up. I understand at one point I was scouted by Colgate, but obviously they didn't take me, so maybe the game they came to watch me, I wasn't that great. Anyway, that was just a rumor, which I pass on. Williamson Flash, yeah. Well, I called myself that when I used to play in the backyard at our house in Juniper. I had a very good time because we had a class of individuals who liked each other. Also, it was a time when I started to date. Don't forget that I was 16 years old, and all my classmates were 18. We had a good relationship. Again, it wasn't close at the beginning, because in the early days I had my friends, and the two sisters would be together. And I think my relationship started when we lived together in New York. This is one of the major impacts of my life. It happened that I visited my sister Elisa, who had married Robert Lockley, Bob Lockley, and they lived in Williamson, New York, upstate New York. I had a friend come with me. His name is Rich. I call him Richie. It's Rich Keller. On the bus coming up from New York City to Williamson on that trip, we met two young ladies. So we asked if we could go on a date with them. And we went to Irondequoit, where they have a carnival type place, and we had a good time with them. Unfortunately, I hadn't checked the time well. There was a bus that was supposed to leave from Irondequoit to go to Williamson, and we got there 5 minutes late. And I have regretted it to this very day. I think everyone has a situation where if you could do it over again, you would do it over again. Richie took off on his bus, and I called my sister Lisa and Bob. They came out to pick me up and brought me back on a road. The road is Route 104, which goes to Williamson. And we were going back. It was dark, and Bob stopped the car because he had to make a left turn. And in those days, the stoplights are very small. We were hit from behind by a car that the state police told us was traveling at 90 miles an hour. The car hit it so hard that it pressed the very back to the very back of the seats. Luckily, I was sitting in between my sister on my right and Bob was on the left. The car started on fire because it hit the gas tank. So it was a horrible situation. What I remember is I was blacked out. I came to. I felt a tremendous heat. I went out through the right window. From what I learned later, because I was dazed and didn't know what was going on, my sister got out all right, but Bob got his arm through the spokes of the steering wheel, and he wasn't getting out. So she ran back. My sister ran back, because she was perfectly fine. She ran back, opened the door and tried to get him out. While she was doing that, the flames were at her feet. She was burned 70%. The only thing that happened to me was I got a patch this much on my ankle, nothing else. So she went to the hospital immediately, Sodas Point Hospital, and she suffered obviously from burns, third-degree burns. She lingered for 10 days and got pneumonia. She passed away, and we called her Nene. I remember her to this day. I can see her, and I just want to put this on the camera to show that it can happen to anyone. So love that person while they're here. And I continue to feel guilty all these years. Again, that is a major impact in my life. I went to Syracuse. I found myself really out of sync, much more mature students than I was. My roommate was very sharp. He dressed so well. And here I came, and I had a leather jacket with all the zippers that go around. That wasn't what was going on at Syracuse, so I was really out of it. I had to make some changes myself. We went to a brand new dormitory. Our floor happened to be the floor that they kept the radio TV students in, and I valued that time of my freshman year. The following year I stayed at another dormitory across the way that was fairly new. The third year I went into the fraternity. I lived, we had a room of four of us that had desks, and we studied there. And then the attic, they had the beds. So we slept upstairs, and boy, was it cold at Syracuse. I decided not to live at the fraternity in my senior year, so my friend Jerry March, who is a doctor now, and I decided we're going to rent an apartment just off campus. In my freshman year, I went out for the soccer team, although I had no experience. So I was playing soccer against big teams like Penn State, and I was practicing soccer one day out on the field, and I looked across the field, and there was this crazy group playing with a stick and a ball. It's called lacrosse. I said, that looks interesting, so I bought a lacrosse stick, and I went out for the team. I was able to get on. I got some skills, and in those days, you could walk on. My one goal I scored, it was at Yale. I went in as a geology major. I was very interested in high school in earth science. But after a year, I saw that I was not that interested. So I transferred I asked the dean of engineering if I could go into the engineering school. Then I took physics, and that was the end of engineering, because I could not grasp physics. So I said, I'm going to go into business school and marketing, because I thought that was an up-and-coming area. My social life at Syracuse pretty much was with international students. I became the head of the International Students Organization, so my job was really to get activities up so that we could get those students out. In my freshman year, I did pledge a fraternity, but I went with a one that's not well known. It's called Alpha Chi Rho. They're, I would say, very diverse. But of course, we loved it when we became Sophs, and we were able to get even with the pledges. I was in the fraternity, actually living there in my junior year, but I really didn't get too much into fraternity life. We had 12. Most of them were from the forestry school. Very good guys. They were tough, and respected them because they were a good look at what a man should be. The night of the initiation, we went out at midnight into this huge cemetery. They put a spoon at this grave, and we were supposed to find it. But this cemetery had probably 10,000 graves, and we were trying to find it. Finally, we all got together and said, we're not going to find this. So let's go to the Orange. We went to the bar, and we gave up looking for it, and we'd have to take the consequences. So we went drinking. I was in my sophomore year, probably in the middle of my sophomore year, and I was at Syracuse. She was in that cottage that my father bought on Lake Ontario, lovely place, which is about 80 miles away. I would probably try to come back once a month and just spend the weekend with my mother. She was quite happy there, and she loved reading. She was a librarian, so she would take books out from the library and spend her time reading, I'm sure. My mother wanted to raise St. Bernard puppies, so she had purchased 2 small puppies. The summer before her passing, my father had his helper dig a large hole on the edge of our property. It was probably about 6 feet deep. The idea was, when you have garbage, you just throw it in there, and then they would cover it up. And then the next time you'd need it, you dig another hole on the edge of the property. That was the idea. Unfortunately, the top, they didn't cover it. We tried to piece together what happened. And what happened, we believe, is that the St. Bernard, for some reason, it might have been a wet day or something and very muddy and slippery, fell into the hole because they found both my mother and the dog in the hole. She was trying to get the dog out, I'm sure. But being so slippery and the thing was so deep, she fell in, I'm sure, head first and couldn't get out. And with no one around, I mean, the closest house was probably 500 feet away. If she screamed, nobody would hear. It was such a tragic thing that she had endured all those years in the Philippines with death all around from the Japanese being there. And she would come back to a nice, lovely place and then die in a horrific way. They called me at the dorm, so I drove back very quickly and saw my brother-in-law, Bob, who was there, and the rest of his family, and they were trying to console me. My father learned about it, and of course he flew out right away. I think he got there 2 days after, and we arranged for the funeral arrangements. But first, I went to the state police barracks because obviously they had to hold a preliminary investigation. So one of the things was they began questioning me, and they were I was trying to establish an alibi that I was at Syracuse, and of course it was easy because my roommate was there and could vouch that I had been there, and all the other fellows in the dorm that I had seen that day were able to vouch for me. So I was cleared of any possibility that I might have been the cause. They did the same thing with relatives, Bob Lockley, and so the determination by the coroner was it was an accident caused by a dog slipping into the hole, her trying to retrieve it. We buried her close to where my sister, Elisa Lockley, was buried, and my grandma was there too. So there were three of our close relatives in one spot. It's a beautiful place, Pulteneyville Cemetery. My sister Mary and I have gone back and visited and left flowers, and junior year, after my junior year in the summer, I was going to summer school. So my friend Trevor and I decided we're going up, and he has a girlfriend that's working in Lake Placid as a waitress. We got to the Lake Placid club, and Trevor asked his girlfriend out. So Joan was watching a movie, My Friend Flicka. So Dottie asked her, please go out on a blind date. She did. She went out. We got along pretty well. After that, we said, let's go out tomorrow and we'll go and sightsee and drive around Lake Placid and Mirror Lake. So the semester started again in September. You're going to go to the football games, obviously, and you want to get student tickets. So I got online. It was a pretty lengthy line. I look around, and 3 people behind me was Joan Hannigan. I thought that it was just a summer love. So I said, hey,
why don't you come up? That's where it started up again. We never thought, either one of us, that it would happen again, but we both did go to Syracuse, and we dated throughout that year. And I thought she was very good looking, very beautiful, and we found that we liked each other. And yeah, she got the Asian flu very badly, so she had to go to the infirmary, and she missed her classes. So that really hurt her quite a bit, because she couldn't take her classes. I visited her in the infirmary, and we were talking, and I noticed that she had a little tiny book that she wrote in, and I happened to glance at it, and it said, Mrs. Ramon Racelis, and I said, oh, this is not good. I'm thinking to myself. And so I left, but she put a lot of value in that I had visited her when she was sick. So we began dating again, and we went to dances and continued to have a good time. I always have told our kids that if she had really continued to watch Flicka, they would never have been born. I went into my senior year thinking, what am I going to be doing after I graduate? And later on, I found I should probably go into the Army, because at that time they had the draft. It was possible that you could volunteer to go in, and you would spend 2 years in the service, and then they would let you out, and you'd go into 6 years of reserve duty. I thought that was a way to get it over and done with. Joan was pretty excited when in a negative way, that I had decided to go into the Army. So, because she was probably expecting that we would get married after that. I decided I would go into being a clerk. A clerk would be in the headquarters, and you either, you type and you file, just what a secretary does. But I spent the 2 years, really a year and a half, in Fort Lewis, Washington. And it was nice because Joan wanted to come out, and she came and got a job with her older company, New York Life Insurance. And so she lived in Seattle, and I was in Fort Lewis, which is about 30 miles south. So we could get together on weekends. So we had a very good time out there. Probably the best time that we figured of our early life, yeah. I got out of the service in 1960 in September, went to New York, got that job, and then, well, we had been going back and forth between on the bus between Syracuse and New York City.
It was 8 hours.
Yeah, 8-hour trips each time. So
every weekend.
But it was always overnight, so you could sleep. And at Shraff's, she said, "Listen, we have to get serious. When are we going to get married?" So she really put it to me. And I said, "Oh, well, let's try February, which is only in December. Then to February was only 2 months away." It was supposed to be February, but it had to be delayed because my father was ill with something. So we got married April 15th, 1961. I also had to take Catholic lessons while Joan calls her father and tells him that she's getting married, and they were not very happy that she was marrying me. We didn't expect them to come to the wedding. Comes the day of the wedding, my father flies in, and it was really the first time that she had met him in person. It was at the back of the church. I think he was supposed to lead it, but actually her father and her stepmother did come. So her father did take her down the aisle. And there was about, I would say, 50 people in total. And if you look at the pictures of the wedding, we're very happy, and our friends are all happy. The bridesmaid, and groomsmen, groom, we were all happy, but the Hannigans were not happy. They were glum. If you look at the wedding pictures, they're just so down. Our honeymoon, we went to Washington, D.C. We had changed our plans. We were supposed to go to Quebec, but because my father had come in, we didn't want to leave him alone, and decided to cut it short so that we could join my father back in Flushing, New York. But during that time, he took us to 5 shows, Broadway shows, almost every night. I had gotten that job with International Packers, got my promotion. So this was 1961. I took our belongings in a trunk and filled up my Volkswagen, my 55 Volkswagen. We left Flushing and we started to drive to Chicago. We found an apartment on the very north side of Chicago. So I went to the University of Chicago and took courses. A lot of them were in international relations. I did not get the diploma because I owed the thesis and I had to complete a German exam. But I figured I would do that while I was getting a job. I'd spend a lot of time going to classes, and then in between I'd go to the library, and then come home late, about 6 or 7 at night. It was exciting to think that we're going to have a baby, and we didn't know what, at that time you don't know what sex was going to be, so it made it more exciting. There is one time, being new parents, that one night we just looked at each other and said, why don't we go to the movies? So we got up, we left, we walked 4 blocks to the Howard movie house, and as we were getting our tickets, Joan says, wait, we have a baby, we can't do it. So we ran home. Lisa was there in the crib, just fine, but it's crazy that you think that you completely, your life has changed and we didn't realize it. So that was a funny story at that time. Like a typical first child, we really cared for her too much. So I think we learned a lot about bringing up kids, and that we were able to pass on to the others, but Lisa was always our experiment. Yeah, Laura was, but she actually was born at Evanston Hospital. We brought her back to that house on the 3-star walk-up, and we only spent, I think, 1 or 2 nights there before we made the move, and brought the 2 girls up there. In the meantime, we had to move from place to place, probably 4 times. 4 times with the kids, 3 of them. I think from the beginning it was always that we're going to do this for a short time, get the experience, come back, maybe go to another country, and that was always the idea. So we did spend 8 years total down there. 1966 we took the 3 kids, because Chris was just like 6 months when he went down there. So we went to Mexico City, looking for a place, and we found one in a suburb. The street was Rivera de Cupia, 51. It was a nice modern house. Then we decided we needed to cut expenses a little bit, and we found a place further down in an area called Lomas de Chapultepec, and it was more in the area where their stores are, and it was a good apartment. We had a very good time socially in Mexico. We had a lot of good memories and a lot of good friends. Joan and I would go to the racetrack sometimes. We had 2 maids, so we could leave the kids with the maids and make sure they were safe. Definitely Mexico was a peak because we were so successful business-wise. We were successful, Joan and I, in socializing. We had many good friends. The children were blossoming. They were in the American school, and they were learning English, and they had a Spanish curriculum. They were doing well in school, and they had good friends. So I'd say we were a very successful family as a whole. Laura did well. Laura is the one that liked Mexico a lot, and didn't really want to come back to the United States. Lisa and Chris said, "Yeah, great," but she really the only one that loved it. She had her friends. She felt very comfortable. Lisa would always take care of Steve. Chris and Laura got along together. I think that's how it shaped up. And we had very nice birthday parties for them. Sometimes we'd hire a clown to come in, and you could hire a horse to ride. So the kids, we'd take them up there, and they would take a short half-hour ride. I took them to the park a lot. They had wonderful parks in Mexico City. I'd say one of the activities I most fondly remembered was I would come back from work, and then we would play a game called Octopus. And I would lie on my back, and they would run around me, and I would catch them by foot or one of their arms, and I'd hold them, and then the others would try to free her, and of course I would grab them, and at one point I'd have all 4 of them trying to escape from the octopus. Another game we played was Steamroller. Steamroller was, they would lie down in a row, and I would just roll over them. So for some reason they got a big kick out of that. One day it came about that I told both Chris and Steve that I had stopped filming the Tarzan series. I played Tarzan, and they said, "Come on, you don't believe that?" I said, "Yeah, I played Tarzan." And they said, "Give us some proof." So Joan went and got the script from the Tarzan series, and they looked at it, and they, with wide eyes, they were astounded. Pretty much. I said, "Yeah, it took a lot of time, and I had to show my muscles, but it worked out pretty well. So, you know, that's how we made some good money." And from then on, I kept it up, and I think Chris pretty much didn't believe it after about a week, but Steve kept asking me, "Were you really Tarzan?" I said, I'll make some phone calls, and then you can believe it." You know, so he kept believing. I bet you he believed it for 3 years. That was funny every time that he was trying, and he'd try to catch me every so often. But I was able to
recover in time and tell the old story about me being Tarzan.
Let's see, I decided that I was going to look for a job with an international division. So I did interview with a lot of, I would think, 5 companies, and then there was A.B. Dick Company, who made mimeographs and printing equipment, and so I did go with them. They were looking for a training person to go to Mexico and train their salespeople there, but the manager there decided he's going to make me sales manager. So I was only training for about a year. That was a struggle because when obviously they weren't doing well when I went down there, and that was the reason they sent me, because I had to train those guys. But when I became sales manager, then I was responsible for the results. That was quite different. And I proved it when I went to GBC Mexico. We just blossomed. We did so well. We were so profitable. I started looking around for another company, and I went to the U.S. In November of 1968. That was when the Olympics were going on in Mexico City. So I went up and I visited different companies that I had gotten interviews with, and I came upon a company called General Binding Corp., GBC, and we were selling spiral bindings and laminating machines. I thought I had done enough at GBC. We brought the company from 12 to 60 employees in 5 years. I mean, we were doing so much business hand over foot. We decided we were going to come back to the States. Yeah, I was managing the international dealers. Yeah, I have to say that as far as my career, I personally was happy with what I did. I was able to bring our family up in good circumstances. They all went to college. I always felt guilty knowing that my sister was doing very good things, helping the poor, but overall my career was satisfying. Good friends and people I worked for were very good. The companies did well, and so all the people that were employed by them did well, so it was satisfying. Excitement is the word, because ever since I had a job, I wanted to retire and get on to having fun. By that time, we had already started looking for a place to live in Florida. We were going to leave Chicago and go to Florida. We called, we told the kids, and they said, "Oh no," he said, "you can't, we'll never get to see you that much, because we'll only be able to make a trip once a year. Why don't you come back up here?" So we decided to go to the V that we had seen and talked about in the past, and we finally said, this is it. The V is like living on a cruise ship that never leaves the dock.
Naive, innocent, fun.
I talked about the 2 impacts in my life and how it changed me and served as a way of life. The first impact was being in a war in the Philippines, or in Manila particularly. most every family had a casualty, and many families actually never lived through it. There was so much destruction during the war, and that our really entire larger family, including the uncles, aunts, got through the war without an injury. And then the impact of losing my sister at her early age, I got the feeling that death could come to you at any time. So take it easy, don't worry. Just enjoy life with your family and prize them all the time, love them all the time, and you know that that's a good way of life. You never know where you're going to end up. I mean, when Joan and I were in New York, we thought New York was our destiny, that we would be there, we'd raise the family, and that would be our life. And only through a chance promotion from a nondescript company like International Packers, I get promoted to Chicago, which is a completely different environment, because our 4 kids went to 4 Midwestern colleges. They didn't go to Syracuse. They didn't go to any Eastern colleges. It changed their life. Having moved to the Midwest really changed my life and life of the family. Going to Mexico City was sort of a detour, and the children, I think, learned a lot from being there and seeing poverty along with privilege side by side. They understood more when they came back that their life in the North Shore was privileged, and that there were still in the world, there was poverty, even in the Chicago area, just 60 miles south. And they were much more serious, I think, than other children that were with them, because they understood that this wasn't the real world, you know. They were privileged.
I don't think I would give myself any advice. I think I took the right turns at all the right crossroads. And I'm happy each time that we made a decision, a joint decision, Joan and me. We took, I think, the right decision after we see what the results came to be.
Yeah.
I don't want to give myself any advice. I think the route I took was good. I would say go with the flow. I think, as I think I said before, those impacts that happened to me early on by the Japanese invasion causing us to leave for the United States, and that so many families suffered casualties and deaths in the Philippines, and the impact of my sister's passing by an accident, a car accident, took it very hard. And those are events, along with the death of my mother. They're just freak events, and you just have to say, you never know what's going to come up. And so take life, as it is. Don't get too anxious. Let life come to you.
Go with the flow.
Go with the flow. Jack Patsa. I'm dyslexic. Yeah, Wheel of Fortune. And Patsy Jack. See, I just said it.
Ah, you said it.